I don't usually talk about this kind of thing. I've gone over it in my head countless times, trying to decide if it even makes sense to put into words, but I've realized that silence only makes the memory stronger, like a shadow that thickens in the dark. So maybe by telling it, by saying everything exactly how it happened, I'll lessen the weight of it, or maybe I'll only make it worse. Either way, I can't carry this alone anymore. When all of this began, my life was already unraveling in quiet, ordinary ways. I wasn't in school anymore, though I couldn't really explain why. I'd bounced between jobs, waiting tables, stocking shelves, doing odd shifts wherever someone was desperate enough to hire. Nothing stuck. The rent notices stacked up, and each day carried that same dull panic, the gnawing knowledge that one more overdue bill might mean I'd lose everything. It wasn't dramatic, not really, just suffocating. The kind of pressure that makes you desperate enough to ignore the little voice in your head that's trying to warn you. So when I saw the ad for a house sitter, I told myself it was a lifeline. The posting was almost too simple. Someone needed a responsible person to stay in their house for a few weeks while they were away. Keep an eye on the place, water a few plants, bring in the mail. The pay was higher than I expected. Higher than it should have been, honestly, for something so undemanding. But I didn't question it. That should have been my first red flag, but I brushed it aside. Money first, questions later. I remember the first time I pulled up to the house. The neighborhood was strange. Not a suburb, not quite rural either. The road twisted through woods and empty lots. No street lamps, just darkness pressing against my headlights. Then, through the trees, I saw it. The house itself was larger than I imagined, old, but not falling apart. Its frame loomed out of the fog like it had been waiting there a long time, hidden away from the rest of the world. 2 stories, gabled roof, shutters that looked as though they'd been painted over too many times. It wasn't decrepit exactly. It was too still. A kind of stillness that made me hesitate at the gate. The owners greeted me at the door. A man and a woman, middle-aged, both dressed neatly, their expressions fixed with a politeness that didn't quite reach their eyes. Their voices were soft, almost rehearsed, as if they'd gone over what to say before I arrived. "Thank you for coming," the woman said, smiling. The smile seemed heavy, stretched like she was holding it in place rather than letting it form naturally. The man shook my hand with a grip that was firm, but lingering just a second too long. "We're relieved to have someone trustworthy watching the house. It means a lot to us." I told myself they were just anxious about leaving a stranger behind with their property. That made sense. Most people would be. Still, something about the way they stood, side by side, a little too close, watching me like they were evaluating something unseen, left me uneasy. They showed me around the place. The first floor was a mix of dated furniture and spotless surfaces. The living room had thick curtains drawn across every window, the kind of heavy fabric that blocks out not just light but sound. A grandfather clock ticked softly in the hall, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet house. Upstairs, the hallway stretched longer than I expected, lined with doors. Bedrooms, a study, and one room that was locked. The man didn't acknowledge it, didn't even gesture toward it. He kept moving, as though the door wasn't there at all. That stuck with me, the deliberate omission. Back downstairs, they gave me a sheet of paper, a list of rules. I glanced at it, expecting things like, "Don't forget to set the alarm," or "Please don't smoke inside." And some of it was normal. Water the plants, bring in the mail, make sure the pipes didn't freeze. But other lines made my stomach twist. Keep all curtains closed after dark. Do not enter the locked upstairs room. If you hear noises at night, do not investigate. And at the bottom, written in smaller text, no matter what, do not open the basement door. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe they were joking, but the man's face remained blank and the woman only folded her hands. "It's just an old house," she said. "It makes sounds. Nothing to worry about." Her words were meant to be reassuring, but they weren't. They brushed over the oddities too quickly, like someone closing a book before you could read the last line. I asked them once, lightly, about the locked room upstairs. The man cut me off before I finished the sentence. "That's not for you," he said. His voice was calm, but the firmness in it made me stop immediately. The tour ended soon after. They thanked me again, too many times, their smiles fixed. When they finally left, I stood in the silence of the house, listening to the echo of the door shutting behind them. The stillness pressed in on me like a weight. It should have felt like an opportunity. Free lodging, easy pay, nothing expected of me but to exist in the space. But the longer I stood there, the more the silence gnawed at me. The house wasn't warm or welcoming. It was watchful. Every tick of the clock, every groan of the old wood, every rustle of the trees outside the window felt amplified, like the house was breathing with me, waiting for me to slip. I tried to shake it off. I needed this. I needed the money. That was the mantra I repeated to myself as I unpacked my bag in the guest room, the one they had set aside. I laid on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the faint hiss of wind against the shutters. It was just a house, I told myself, just a job. But already from that first night, I felt the edges of something I couldn't yet name pressing in. And if I'd been smarter, if I'd trusted the instinct gnawing at me, I would have walked away before the sun set, but I didn't. I stayed, and in staying I sealed myself to what came after. The night before they left, the couple sat me down in the kitchen. I thought it was just going to be the usual last-minute instructions. Which plants needed more water, which neighbors might stop by, the alarm code, all the standard things that come with watching someone else's home. Instead, the man slid a piece of paper across the table, a single sheet neatly printed, each line numbered. At first glance, it looked ordinary enough, but as my eyes scanned down the list, a quiet unease curled in my stomach. The first few lines were harmless. Water the plants every other day. Bring in the mail by 6 p.m. Lock all doors and windows at night. Those made sense. Then the rules started to shift. Do not leave any curtains open after sunset. Do not touch the locked room upstairs. Avoid looking out of the east-facing windows between midnight and 3 a.m. Never open the basement door. I stared at the words, reading them again as though I had misinterpreted. My first instinct was to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. It wasn't written like a joke. The wording was too precise, too deliberate. The woman must have seen the confusion in my face because she offered a smile. It was the same smile I'd noticed earlier, polite but strained, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "The house is old," she said softly, her fingers laced tightly in front of her. "It makes noises. It has drafts. The windows don't seal the way they should. Sometimes things seem strange when you're here alone. The rules are just to keep everything in order." Her words were smooth, but they didn't fit the sharp edges of the rules I'd just read. The man added, "You'll find it easier if you don't question them. Just follow the list exactly as it's written, and you won't have any problems." I wanted to ask what problems, but the weight of his tone pressed the words down before they left my mouth. Instead, I forced a smile and folded the paper. Sure, no problem. The truth was, I was unsettled. Not enough to walk away. Couldn't afford to walk away, but unsettled in the way you feel when you sense someone's holding something back. Like watching an actor deliver lines with just enough hesitation to reveal the cracks. After dinner, they did another quick walkthrough of the house, pointing out things they'd already shown me. The thermostat, the water shutoff valve, the emergency numbers by the phone. It was all routine, but I noticed they skipped the upstairs hallway entirely this time. Not a word about the locked door. When we returned to the kitchen, the man pressed the rule sheet back into my hands. "Keep this with you," he said. "Don't lose it." It was late when they finally left. Their car's headlights cut across the lawn, then disappeared down the dark road, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. I stood at the front window watching the last glimmer of red taillights vanish into the trees, and for the first time I felt a real chill settle over me. The paper crinkled in my hands. I looked down at the list again, the words sharper now as though they'd sunk deeper into the page. Never open the basement door. The line seemed to pulse in my vision. It wasn't just the absurdity of the rule. It was the way it implied something was behind that door, something that required a warning. I told myself it was nonsense. Old houses had locked rooms and musty basements. Maybe the wood was warped. Maybe the stairs were dangerous. Maybe they didn't want their guest tripping in the dark and suing them. Rational explanations existed. They had to. Still, I couldn't shake the image of the man's face when he'd said, "Just follow the list exactly." His voice was calm, but underneath it was something else. Not fear exactly. Resignation. I walked through the house with the paper still in hand, checking the doors and windows like the list suggested. The curtains were already drawn tight, thick fabric swallowing the last of the evening light. The air felt heavier now, as though the house had exhaled once the owners left and now wanted me to notice how quiet it really was. By the time I climbed the stairs to my room, I found myself glancing at the locked door without meaning to. It was unmarked, painted the same dull beige as the others, but its presence carried weight. Like an eye that never blinked. I shook it off, retreated to the guest room, and set the rule sheet on the nightstand. I told myself not to overthink it, not to turn every creak of the floorboards into something sinister. But as I lay in bed, listening to the house breathe around me, my eyes kept drifting to the nightstand, to the paper, to the words that told me what I must not do. The rules weren't just instructions, they were boundaries, and boundaries only exist when there's something dangerous on the other side. I didn't sleep well that night. The first few nights passed in a rhythm that should have felt ordinary, but didn't. During the day, the house was manageable. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the walls in shifting patterns, and for a few hours it almost felt normal. I moved through the kitchen, watered the plants, checked the mail, and convinced myself the unease was fading. But at night, the silence pressed in. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with peace. It was dense, deliberate, like the air itself was listening. Every sound, the creak of the stairs, the tick of the clock, the groan of the old pipes, carried too far, echoing into spaces that should have been still. By the second night, I noticed the scratching, faint, irregular, coming from somewhere inside the walls. At first I chalked it up to mice or squirrels. Old houses had pests, but the more I listened, the less it sounded like random scurrying. The rhythm shifted, like something testing, probing, feeling its way through the structure. The locked door upstairs lingered in my mind constantly. I didn't try the handle, not yet, but I couldn't ignore its presence. Passing it in the hallway, I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. It wasn't just the door itself. It was the way the silence pooled around it, heavy and unnatural, like the house was holding its breath every time I drew near. On the third night, while walking down the hallway, I saw something that froze me mid-step. The shadow of the door didn't match. The other doors along the hall cast their shadows flat against the opposite wall, thin and sharp under the dim ceiling light. But the locked door's shadow was thicker, darker, and stretched farther than it should have. It bent strangely, like it was cast from a deeper frame of depth. I blinked and it looked normal again, but my chest was tight. I started keeping mental notes of small things that seemed off. The chair at the kitchen table was slightly angled differently each morning, though I never touched it. A glass I left drying by the sink one night appeared back in the cupboard the next. Sometimes when I turned quickly, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, a figure shifting just out of frame. But when I faced it, nothing was there. I told myself it was fatigue. I was still adjusting to the space, still haunted by the odd rules the owners had left me. But deep down I knew. Houses didn't behave like this, not unless something inside them wanted to be noticed. One evening, I sat in the living room with all the lights off, listening. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a faint draft brushing across the back of my neck. I turned, half expecting to see a window open, but everything was sealed. Curtains drawn, latches secure. The air moved anyway, threading cold fingers along my skin. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Around 2 a.m, I heard a door shift somewhere down the hall. Not slam, not creak, just shift, like the frame had expanded or the knob had been touched lightly. I sat up, straining to hear. For a long time, nothing followed. Then faintly, the sound of the upstairs door, the locked door, settling back into place. The longer I stayed, the more I began to dread the nights. I caught myself watching the clock as evening fell, calculating how many hours of silence I'd need to endure before daylight returned. I forced routines on myself: tea before bed, checking the locks 3 times, writing in a small notebook just to bleed off the tension. But routines didn't change the way the house responded after dark. Every sound, every draft, every shifting shadow carried intent. By the 5th night, I couldn't deny it anymore. The house wasn't empty. It was waiting. By the 6th night, the locked door upstairs wasn't just a detail in the house. It was the center of everything. At first, I tried to ignore it, treating it like a closed-off part of the house I didn't need to worry about. But ignoring it was like trying to ignore a set of eyes fixed on the back of your neck. Every time I passed it in the hall, I felt it watching me. The sensation was so vivid that I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the knob slowly turning, the door cracking open, something peering through. The air near it always felt different, colder, heavier. I couldn't explain it, and I hated that I noticed. Sometimes, as I brushed by, it seemed like the silence bent around it, muffling the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Then came the sounds. The first time, I heard it late at night lying in bed with the notebook on my lap. A faint dragging sound above me, like furniture scraping against the floor. I froze. There was no room directly above the guest room, not unless you counted the locked door. I told myself it was just the house settling, that maybe the wood had shifted, but then it came again. Longer this time. A slow, deliberate drag, as though something heavy was being moved across the floor. The next night I heard breathing. It was soft, muffled, but unmistakable. Standing in the hallway with my ear tilted toward the door, I caught the faint rhythm of it. Steady, human. The realization hit me so hard that I stumbled back against the wall. Someone was inside. I tried to rationalize, to convince myself it was just air moving through vents or the shifting of the pipes, but no explanation carried the weight of what I'd heard. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't structural. It was alive. By the end of the week, I began writing everything down: times, sounds, sensations. My notes filled quickly with entries like .17 a.m., dragging noise again. Longer this time, 3:04 a.m., breathing, definitely breathing. Hall light flickered when I passed the door. It didn't feel like paranoia anymore. It felt like documentation, but the more I documented, the more it escalated. One night, as I walked past with my notebook in hand, the doorknob rattled, just once, quick, like someone inside had given it a sharp twist. I nearly dropped the notebook. My chest tightened as I stared at the knob, half expecting it to turn further to open, but it stilled, leaving me frozen in the dim light of the hallway, the silence buzzing in my ears. After that, it became harder to sleep. I started keeping the notebook on the nightstand, jotting things down as they happened. My entries became frantic, less organized. 2:45, I'm scratching. Closer now. 3:12, rattling again, louder. 3:47, swear I heard whispering, couldn't make out words. I don't know if it was the lack of sleep or the mounting fear, but soon, I began to feel the presence even when I wasn't near the door. Walking through the kitchen, I'd sense it pressing from above. In the living room, the silence carried weight, as though tethered to the hallway upstairs. Even outside, when I stepped into the yard to clear my head, the house loomed behind me. The upstairs window dark and unyielding, and I felt it watching. The strangest part was how the house seemed to encourage it. Every creak, every draft, every flicker of the lights pulled my attention back to that one place. I couldn't tell if the house was warning me away or guiding me closer. By the 8th night, I'd stopped denying it. Something was in that room, something alive. But what unsettled me most wasn't the thought of what waited behind the door. It was the question I couldn't shake. How long had it known I was here? By the 9th day, the house had stopped pretending. It no longer tried to pass itself off as an ordinary home. It revealed itself in fragments, small unsettling details that stacked into something larger, heavier, impossible to dismiss. The first discovery came while I was dusting the downstairs hallway, a chore I'd assigned myself just to fill the silence. I ran the cloth over the wooden door frames and my hand caught on something jagged. I leaned closer. There, etched faintly into the grain, were scratches. Thin, uneven, but deliberate. At first I thought of an animal, maybe a cat or a dog, but the marks were too high up and too deep. 4 parallel grooves dragged across the frame as though clawed hands had scraped the wood in desperation. I checked the other frames. More marks, some faint, some fresh enough that splinters still curled from the edges. They weren't everywhere, but scattered, like the house had been tested over and over, room by room. I stepped back, staring at the hallway differently now. It wasn't just age. It wasn't just wear. Something had fought to leave a mark here, to remind anyone passing through that it existed. The second discovery came in the study. I'd gone in to straighten a stack of books and noticed the photographs on the wall. Old black and white family portraits in ornate frames. At first they seemed ordinary, stiffly posed parents and children in formal clothing. But as I leaned closer, my stomach tightened. Their faces were missing, not blurred, not faded, removed. Every figure in every photo had their face carefully scratched out or cut away, leaving behind smooth ovals of nothing. A family of faceless figures staring out from gilded frames. I stepped back, pulse racing. Who had done this? The homeowners? Someone before them? And why leave the photos up at all, displayed like trophies of absence? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the faceless figures were still watching me, even without eyes. The third discovery was worse. I'd noticed the desk in the study had a locked drawer. For days, I ignored it, respecting boundaries I told myself were just part of house sitting. But curiosity gnawed at me until I tried the handle. Locked, of course. Still, the weight of it felt strange, like something inside shifted when I tugged. It took me an hour to find the key. It was tucked in a hollow under one of the drawers, almost like it wasn't meant to be found. When I turned it in the lock, the drawer slid open reluctantly, as though resisting. Inside were scraps of paper, torn from journals or notebooks. I picked one up, my hand trembling. The writing was frantic, uneven, sometimes slanting off the page. Words overlapped, scratched out, rewritten. I could barely piece together sentences, but what I could read made my skin crawl. It whispers at night, I can hear it through the vents. The rules don't keep it out. They only keep us in. I saw my own face in the mirror, but it wasn't me. I rifled through the scraps, each one worse than the last. Some were stained with what looked like water damage, others with smudges that might have been blood. None of them were signed. My breath came shallow as I shoved the papers back into the drawer and slammed it shut. But even after I locked it again, the words stayed with me. That night, I tested the vents. I pressed my ear against one in the hallway and waited. For a long time, I heard nothing but the low hum of air. Then faintly, like a whisper pressed between walls, came voices, too soft to make out, too close to dismiss. I jerked back, heart pounding, and for a moment I was certain someone was speaking just on the other side, listening as much as whispering. The locked door upstairs hummed louder that night. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a vibration, subtle enough to feel in the floorboards and in the frame of the walls. I woke 3 times to the sensation, lying in bed with the sheets pulled to my chin, staring at the ceiling as if it could cave in. The next morning, I tried to ground myself. I turned to the internet, searching the address of the house, the owner's names, anything that might explain its history. Nothing. No real estate listings, no public records, not even an old news clipping. It was as if the house didn't exist outside its own walls. The silence of the web was more chilling than anything I'd seen inside. I stared at my notebook, the entries growing frantic, more desperate with each passing night. My handwriting was slipping into the same frantic rhythm I'd seen in the torn-out journal pages. The realization hit me with a cold certainty. I wasn't the first to keep records in this house, and I wouldn't be the last. The house was swallowing them, swallowing us. It happened on the 11th night. I'd been circling the house in restless loops all evening, unable to sit still. The rules pressed on my mind like weights, heavier each day. I kept rereading them, the way one stares at a warning label too many times until the words no longer felt like language, but like commands drilled into my bones. Never open the basement door. Don't touch the locked room upstairs. Don't look out the east-facing window after midnight. That last one had haunted me for days. Why the window? Why midnight? I told myself I wouldn't test it. I swore to myself. But promises made in the daylight dissolved in the thick silence of night. Curiosity is a patient infection. It spreads slowly, unnoticed, until it owns you entirely. When the clock in the living room chimed 12, I found myself already standing in front of the forbidden window. The curtains were drawn, but a sliver of moonlight pushed through. My hand hovered just above the fabric, trembling. I knew I shouldn't. I knew every scrap of instinct begged me to stop. But the pressure of the house, the way it breathed and whispered and shifted, made resisting feel impossible. I pulled the curtain aside. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. The yard outside wasn't the yard I'd been mowing and pacing for the last week. It was larger, much larger. The neat square of grass had stretched into something vast, rolling, dissolving into heavy fog. The fence was gone, swallowed. The tree line I'd seen during the day was farther away now, impossibly far, like the property had unfolded overnight into miles of wilderness. And in the fog stood structures, shapes. At first they looked like sheds or barns, half visible, leaning at wrong angles. But as my eyes strained, I realized they didn't follow any human design. They were jagged, asymmetrical, like ruins of something ancient trying to mimic buildings but failing, as though they had been grown instead of built. My breath fogged the glass. I leaned closer. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall, thin, wrongly proportioned, limbs slightly too long, neck craned at an angle that suggested it should have snapped. It moved with a slow, dragging rhythm across the fog-laden yard, its shape bleeding in and out of visibility. I froze. My hand tightened on the curtain, but I couldn't look away. The figure paused midway across the yard. Slowly, with dreadful precision, its head turned toward the house, toward me. I dropped the curtain, stumbling back so fast I nearly tripped over the coffee table. My heart thundered in my chest. I pressed a hand over my mouth, afraid even my breathing might draw it closer. When I finally dared to peek again, the fog had thickened. The figure was gone, but I knew what I'd seen. The rules weren't arbitrary. They weren't quirks of eccentric homeowners. They were boundaries, warnings, lines not to be crossed, and I had crossed one. The house felt different after that. The air grew heavier, carrying a faint smell like damp soil and rust. Floorboards creaked even when I wasn't moving. Shadows shifted faster, too deliberate to be tricks of light. That night, sleep refused me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every creak and sigh of the house amplified. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. Footsteps above me, pacing in the locked upstairs room. Slow, deliberate, dragging. I shut my eyes tight, clutching the blanket, but the memory of the figure outside pressed behind my eyelids. Had it been walking toward the house? Was it inside now? At some point, I drifted into a shallow, broken sleep. My dreams were worse. Endless corridors, walls bending inwards, doors that opened onto fog. And always that tall figure standing at the end, waiting. When I woke, sunlight poured into the room, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like reprieve. Temporary. The yard looked normal again when I checked. Fence intact, tree line exactly where it should be. But I knew it wasn't real. Reality had bent once. It could bend again. By breaking the rule, I hadn't just disobeyed. I had invited something in. The house was no longer just holding secrets. It was watching to see what I would do next. The day after I broke the rule, the house changed. It wasn't obvious at first. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that the yard had always been the same, that the figure was just some trick of fog and nerves. But denial only works in daylight. At night, truth comes crawling back. The silence that once felt heavy now throbbed with life. The house wasn't quiet anymore. It was restless. It started beneath the floorboards, scratching, faint at first, like mice. But the longer I listened, the more it became clear. These weren't the random scurrying sounds of animals. They were methodical, rhythmic. Something was moving with purpose under there, tracing circles as if mapping the foundations. The walls, too, began to stir. Not visually, not at first. But when I pressed my ear against them, I could hear faint shuffling like someone dragging their hands along the inside of the plaster. Occasionally, a low vibration ran through the wood, like a hum too deep for hearing but heavy enough to rattle my bones. And then came the footsteps upstairs. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every night without fail, the pacing began. Heavy, deliberate, echoing through the ceiling directly above my bed. I could track the movements, back and forth, slow turns, pauses. It was as if something inside the locked room was rehearsing a routine, memorizing the length of the floorboards. I stopped sleeping. Not properly. I'd doze for minutes, wake choking on a dream, scribble notes in the journal I'd started keeping. The entries grew frantic, time-stamped in the early morning hours, my handwriting jagged and uneven. 17 footsteps again. 3:41 scratching under floor near bedroom. 4:06 humming in the walls, can feel it in teeth. The journal became my lifeline, a fragile attempt at control, a way of convincing myself that observation equaled safety. If I wrote it down, maybe it couldn't consume me. But even the journal betrayed me. One morning, I woke to find a page I hadn't written. The handwriting was mine, unmistakably mine, but the words weren't. It's awake now. It likes when you watch. I stared at the sentence until my eyes burned. The ink was still fresh, the letters slightly smudged, as if the pen had just lifted from the paper moments before. I live alone. I knew I hadn't written it, but part of me wondered if I had, in some fugue state, some moment I couldn't remember. That's when the dreams started bleeding into the days. I'd catch myself standing in rooms I didn't remember walking into. The hallways stretched longer than they had any right to. Mirrors caught me at angles that weren't quite accurate, my reflection lagging by a fraction of a second or smiling when I wasn't. The house was feeding on me. I could feel it. Every night I dreamed of endless corridors, dimly lit and suffocatingly narrow. The walls pulsed like lungs, inhaling, exhaling, drawing me deeper. At the end of those corridors, the figure from the yard always waited, its limbs impossibly long, its head bent too far, its silhouette a smear of shadow against the fog. Sometimes it would raise its hand. Not in a wave. In beckoning, I tried to leave. God knows I tried. On the 13th day, I packed my bag, keys clutched so tightly in my fist that they cut grooves into my skin. I marched to the front door, refusing to look at the shadows rippling across the walls. My hand touched the knob and froze. The key wouldn't fit. The lock was wrong, shifted somehow, deeper than before. I tried the back door, the same. I tried every window, but each one showed only fog, pressed up against the glass as though the outside world had been erased. I wasn't in the house anymore. The house was in me. That night, the noises grew louder. Scratching became clawing. Footsteps became stomps. The humming in the walls crescendoed into a sound almost like laughter, low and guttural, vibrating through the floorboards into my chest. I screamed. For the first time since I'd arrived, I screamed into the emptiness, begging it to stop. The sound died instantly, swallowed by the house. Not even an echo returned. I collapsed, shaking, pen in hand, journal open. My entry was barely legible. Letters slanting violently across the page. I know they knew. The owners. They left it here for me. For someone, maybe for anyone stupid enough to take the job. I am not the first. I won't be the last. It wants us.
It needs us. Sleep never came that night.
Only the steady, crawling certainty that whatever lived inside those walls was growing stronger. Because of me. I had broken the rule. I had given it permission. And now it was moving closer. I thought I had seen the worst of it. The footsteps, the scratching, the whispers that slid through the vents like smoke. But the house still had more to show me. It was waiting until I was brittle enough, until my mind had frayed thin as old rope. The discovery came by accident. I was sitting in the study, trying to distract myself by flipping through the old books the owners had left behind. The shelves were lined with novels and encyclopedias, though many of them were blank inside, the pages pure white, as if printed only to appear like books at a glance. My hands trembled when I placed one of them back, and it tilted against the frame, leaving a small gap. Behind it, wedged between the back of the shelf and the wall, was a folded scrap of paper. I almost didn't touch it. My first instinct was to leave it hidden, as though removing it might set off some unseen chain of events. But my curiosity outweighed my fear. My fingers worked the fragile paper free, unfolding it carefully. The words were scrawled in frantic strokes, letters slanted and desperate. Don't stay past the 7th night. It knows you now. The handwriting was disturbingly familiar. My first thought was that it was mine. The tilt of the letters, the uneven way the ink dug too deep into the page. It mirrored my own. I compared it against the journal I'd been keeping, flipping through the entries, and the resemblance was undeniable. For a long moment, I just stared, waiting for some rational explanation to form. Maybe the previous tenant had written it, and by coincidence our handwriting looked the same. Maybe the owners had staged it, another cruel trick to reinforce their ridiculous rules. But deep down, I felt the truth pressing in. The house wasn't just keeping me. It was shaping me. I began searching after that. Slowly at first, pulling open drawers, checking under furniture, lifting picture frames off the walls. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe more warnings, maybe some record of who had come before me. And I found them. In the bottom drawer of the desk, shoved behind old receipts and tax documents, was a half-packed suitcase. Inside were neatly folded clothes, but when I held them up to the light, they smelled faintly of mildew, as if they'd been there for years. In a closet near the front hallway, hidden beneath blankets, I found a pair of women's shoes. They were positioned as though the person had stepped out of them and never returned. The deeper I searched, the stranger the discoveries became. Journals with pages ripped out, photographs where the faces had been carefully scratched away, leaving only blank silhouettes. One diary I found ended mid-sentence, the last words trailing off into a frantic line that gouged the paper. "It's at the door." I dropped the book, my pulse racing. I realized then that I wasn't the first. I wasn't even the 10th, maybe not the 20th. Others had come before me, lured by the same promise of easy money, trapped in the same cycle of silence and shadows. The house wasn't a home. It was a machine, a trap. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the note. Don't stay past the 7th night. I counted back through my journal, flipping through pages covered in shaky ink. 7 nights had already passed. I should have been gone. I should have run before the locks warped and the doors refused to open. But the truth was harsher than that. Leaving wasn't an option anymore. Even if I somehow broke the locks, even if I smashed a window and crawled out into the fog, I had no guarantee there would be a world outside waiting for me. The yard had already changed once. The figure had already looked at me. The rules had been broken. Something knew me now. I stayed awake until morning, listening to the house breathe around me. The walls expanded and contracted with every draft, as though lungs were hidden behind them. The scratching beneath the floorboards no longer bothered hiding itself. It moved openly, pacing back and forth like a caged thing impatient for release. At dawn, I opened the journal to write, to steady myself with words. But when I set the pen down, I saw a second entry written beneath mine, the ink still wet. "You're not writing this alone anymore." I slammed the book shut, my throat dry, bile rising hot in my chest. I threw it across the room, but in the silence that followed, I swore I heard a laugh. Low, muffled, and horribly familiar. It came from upstairs, from the locked room. The house didn't need to keep me much longer. It had already begun taking what it wanted. I'd told myself I wouldn't go near the upstairs door again. I'd promised myself I would stay downstairs, cling to the safer corners of the house, obey whatever scraps of the rules I could still salvage. But promises mean nothing here. The house doesn't wait for your permission. On the 7th night, it decided for me. I woke to the sound of wood groaning, not the usual creaks and sighs of an old structure settling into itself. This was deliberate, like the exhale of something that had been holding its breath too long. I sat up on the couch where I had been sleeping. The air cold and tight in my lungs, the noise came again, a long, slow whine of hinges, upstairs. I didn't want to look, but my eyes moved on their own, drawn toward the staircase that disappeared into darkness. At the top, I thought I saw the faintest shift, the sliver of a door easing open where none should move. The locked door. My body fought itself. Every instinct screamed to stay put, to bury my face in the cushions, to close my eyes and let the house do what it wanted without me. But my legs betrayed me. I was already climbing the stairs before I realized, drawn by something deeper than fear, deeper than reason. The air grew heavier as I approached the landing. It carried a metallic tang, like blood lingering in a hospital corridor. My hand brushed the banister and I recoiled. It was warm, as though someone had just gripped it tightly. The door stood ajar, just enough for a shadow to leak through. A thick blackness, richer than the surrounding dark, bled out into the hallway. It wasn't just absence of light, it was presence. A substance. Something that clung to the edges of my vision like oil. I should have turned back. Instead, I pushed the door open. The room inside was impossible. It was larger than the house allowed, stretching far beyond the dimensions of the upstairs floor plan. The walls bent unnaturally, pulsing faintly as if they were alive. Ribs of some enormous beast. My flashlight flickered and died the instant I stepped inside, leaving me with only the dim, sourceless glow that seemed to rise from the floor itself. At the center of the room sat a chair. It was turned away, facing the far wall. Its wooden frame looked ancient, brittle, as though it had been carved long before the house had ever been built. I could see the faint curve of a figure seated in it, unmoving, its shoulders hunched forward. I tried to speak, to demand who was there, but my throat closed, the words dissolving into dry air. The silence pressed against me like weight. Then the shadows stirred. They shifted along the walls, though there was no light to cast them. They twisted and rippled, elongating into shapes that hinted at limbs, faces, teeth. My stomach knotted as they seemed to lean closer. Craning from the walls to watch me, the chair scraped slightly. Turning, every muscle locked as the figure revealed itself. It was me, or something that wore me. The face was my own, but stretched wrong. The eyes were black, not empty but full, a glossy liquid darkness that reflected nothing. The smile split my face too wide, dragging up toward the ears in a grotesque parody of joy. I staggered back, but the shadows closed around me, herding me forward. The thing in the chair tilted its head, mirroring my movements, studying me like a specimen in a jar. Then it spoke, not aloud but inside my skull, vibrating the marrow of my bones. "We've been waiting." The door slammed shut behind me. The sound reverberated through the warped chamber, echoing in ways that didn't match its dimensions. The walls quivered, breathing faster now, and the shadows convulsed like a colony of insects disturbed. My double rose from the chair with a fluid, unnatural grace, its limbs unfolding longer than mine, stretching as if they'd never had bones at all. I stumbled backward, clawing at the door, but the wood was gone, replaced by smooth, fleshy wall. No escape. The thing that wore my face stepped closer, and with every movement the room bent around it. Angles twisted, the floor dipped like a sinking ship, and the air grew hotter, heavier, suffocating. Its smile widened further, teeth too sharp, too many. I pressed my palms over my ears, but I couldn't block the voice. "You invited us. Every time you looked, every time you listened, every word you wrote. You built the door for us. We only opened it." The shadows surged, crawling up my legs, icy and burning at once. I kicked and thrashed, but they clung tighter, climbing to my chest, wrapping around my throat. My lungs convulsed, and for one sickening instant I thought they would choke me out completely. Then, silence. The shadows loosened, receding just enough for me to breathe. My double leaned close, its breath hot and rancid against my skin. Its eyes bored into mine, endless black wells pulling me deeper. I don't remember how I broke free. One moment I was trapped, the next I was on the hallway floor gasping, the door behind me shut tight as if it had never opened. But I know I didn't imagine it. I can still feel its smile carved into my skin, its words etched in my skull, and worst of all, I can still hear the chair scraping slowly across the floor upstairs, moving closer to the door, waiting. I don't know how long I lay on the hallway floor after the door shut. My body refused to move, every muscle rigid, my mind trying to smother what I'd seen in the upstairs room. But the house didn't let me rest. The air itself began to change, vibrating with a low hum, as if the walls were straining against the weight of something immense pressing in from all sides. That was when reality began to unravel. The first sign came when I tried to steady myself by walking to the bathroom. The hallway stretched farther than it should have, doubling in length, the light fixture above me repeating an impossible sequence. I counted 6 identical bulbs before I reached the end, though there had only ever been 2. When I glanced back, the staircase was gone. The path behind me had twisted into another hallway, identical and endless. Panic clawed at my chest. I shut my eyes, leaned against the wall, and told myself it was sleep deprivation, a hallucination from stress. But when I opened them, the wallpaper was breathing. The faded floral pattern pulsed in and out as though a living lung beat behind it. The smell hit next, like a mix of rot and iron, thick and suffocating. It poured from the vents, riding on a wind that had no source. I covered my nose, gagging, but the stench filled me from the inside as though it had bypassed air and settled directly into my bloodstream. I stumbled through the corridors, every step heavier than the last. My journal thudded against my leg from inside my pocket. I pulled it out like a talisman, gripping it so hard the spine bent. If the house was rewriting itself, I needed to keep track. Words were my only anchor, but the journal was changing too. The entries I'd written the first few nights were gone. In their place were jagged symbols, loops, and slashes that hurt my eyes to look at. On some pages I saw fragmented sentences. Not yours anymore. We share this body. The rooms belong to us. The pen in my hand moved without me. My wrist jerked, scrawling across the page, letters forming words I hadn't thought. Stop fighting. It's easier this way. I dropped the journal, watching as it slid across the floor, only for the floor to ripple like water, swallowing it whole. My breathing collapsed into shallow gasps. The walls around me buckled, pressing inward, then expanded so far they split, revealing cracks that opened onto landscapes that weren't part of this world. Through one window, I saw a desert of bone-white sand under a black sky, something massive crawling just beneath the dunes. Through another, a forest of skeletal trees swayed without wind, their roots knotted around pale bodies that writhed but never escaped. I slammed my hands over my eyes, but I could still see them. The house wasn't showing me visions. It was forcing me into them. Every doorway became a trap. One led me back to the same study again and again, no matter how many times I left it. Another opened into the kitchen, except the kitchen was inverted, ceiling where the floor should be, utensils dangling upward like bats. The refrigerator door swung open on its own, revealing not shelves but a tunnel of flesh pulsing and wet. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. There was no rhythm to time anymore, only a relentless cycle of shifting corridors and voices that whispered just loud enough to drown out my thoughts. At night, if it was even night anymore, the figure from the yard returned. I saw it through a forbidden window I swore I hadn't opened. Its silhouette loomed taller than the house, its outline flickering like static. This time it didn't vanish. It raised one arm, impossibly long, and pressed its hand flat against the glass from the outside. The pane bulged inward beneath its palm, the surface thinning like stretched skin. I ran, but no matter where I went, every window showed the same arm, the same palm pushing closer, as though the figure was inside and outside at once. I wrote frantically in scraps of paper I tore from old books, trying to record what was happening, but the sentences always changed when I looked back. My words became questions I hadn't asked, confessions I hadn't given. I let it in. I wanted it. I was always part of it. I screamed at the walls, begged them to let me out, to show me a door that led somewhere real. The echoes mocked me, repeating my voice back in tones I didn't recognize. Deeper, hungrier, almost gleeful. I don't know how long this lasted. Hours, days, maybe weeks. Time folded in on itself until it meant nothing. My body weakened, but the house didn't let me die. Every time I collapsed, I woke again in a different room, breath filling my lungs whether I wanted it or not, and through it all, the presence followed. I could hear it pacing above me, beside me, inside me. Sometimes it wore my footsteps, sometimes my voice. Other times it stayed silent, letting me strain against the unbearable quiet until I thought I'd go mad. It wasn't haunting me anymore. It was digesting me. The house was never meant to protect anyone. It was meant to consume. Every hallway I walked, every window I avoided, every word I wrote, it was feeding, reshaping itself with pieces of me, pieces of those who came before. And I realized with a sick, sinking certainty that escape wasn't about leaving the house. Escape wasn't possible, because the house wasn't a place. It was a living entity, and I was inside it, and worse, it was inside me. I don't remember deciding it was the last night. The house decided for me. I woke on the floor of the upstairs hallway, though I don't recall lying down. My journal, or what was left of it, lay open beside me. The pages were blank, but when I touched them, a ripple spread across the paper like water disturbed by a drop of blood. The house had taken even my words, stripping away the last tether to who I was. That was when I heard the footsteps. They came from the locked room, though by now, the door was never truly locked. Each slow, deliberate step echoed not only in the hallway but in my bones. It was heavier than a human footfall, dragging as if something vast and unwilling was being forced to move. The sound pulled me like gravity, guiding me toward the door even as every nerve screamed to run. I pressed my hand against the knob. It was warm, pulsing faintly like the skin of a fevered body. The door swung open without effort, Inside, the room was no longer a room. The walls curved inward like the inside of a throat, surfaces slick and shuddering with each beat of some colossal pulse. The air stank of copper and decay. Shadows flickered across the fleshy walls, but there was no light source. They were cast by something deeper within, something that moved even when I stayed still. At the center, the chair waited. Always the chair. It sat in the middle of that impossible chamber, facing away, legs rooted into the floor as though it had grown there. The air thickened with every step I took toward it, my lungs resisting, my vision warping. The whispers I'd heard through the vents, in the walls in my own head, they were loud now, overlapping in 100 different voices. Some mine, some strangers, some so distorted I couldn't place them. I circled the chair slowly, every instinct fighting me. And then I saw who sat in it. It was me. Not a mirror image, not a reflection, but another version, distorted, wrong. Its head lolled slightly to one side, its skin stretched too tightly over sharp bones, lips torn by a smile that never ended. Its eyes were pits of polished black stone, swallowing all light. When it looked up at me, I felt my knees weaken. "I've been waiting," it said. The voice wasn't sound but vibration, rattling in my chest, spoken directly inside my skull. The figure rose from the chair, impossibly tall now, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. As it stood, the room itself reacted. The walls contracting, the pulse quickening, the shadows jerking violently as though excited by its movement. I staggered back, but there was nowhere to retreat. The doorway I'd entered had vanished. The walls closed in, sealing me inside. The figure stepped closer. With each movement, it shifted shape. For a moment, it was the homeowners, their stiff smiles widening until their jaws cracked. Then it became a past tenant, her eyes sunken, her skin gray with rot. Then it was me again, only younger, face slack and pleading. Every version it wore had the same eyes, black voids, endless and hungry. The voices swelled until I couldn't distinguish them. They spoke in unison, a chorus of all who had been here before me. "We belong. You belong. Stop resisting. Stop remembering. Stop being." The figure reached out its hand. My body moved on its own, my arm rising to meet it. Our fingers touched, cold. Not like ice, but like the absence of life itself. My skin blistered where we connected, veins blackening instantly. A current surged into me, filling every nerve with fire, every thought with static. I felt myself unraveling. Memories slipped first, my name, my family, the life I'd lived before this house. They fell away like ash in the wind. The more I tried to hold them, the faster they dissolved. What replaced them were fragments of others. A woman crying in a locked basement. A man clawing at wallpaper until his nails tore off. Children screaming behind a sealed door. All of them swallowed by the house. All of them speaking now through me. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, screaming against the torrent. I tried to write, to grab the last scrap of paper I had and scrawl something, anything to prove I still existed. My hand shook violently, the pen carving jagged lines across the page. The words came out. Final night. Final account. It knows me. It wears me. The figure leaned down, its face inches from mine. It smiled wider, impossibly wide, tearing at the corners of its mouth. Its teeth were jagged mirrors, each one reflecting me. Hundreds of me, all screaming silently inside their glass prisons. "There is no last night," it whispered. The walls convulsed, the entire chamber beating in rhythm with the house's monstrous heart. Light strobed violently, shadows thrashing. I could feel the presence closing in from every side, pressing into my skin, forcing its way into my mouth, my ears, my eyes. I locked myself at the desk, or maybe the desk grew beneath me. Either way, I sat hunched over paper that bled beneath the pen. My writing grew frantic, incoherent. Letters scattered, sentences half-formed, ink dripping like veins split open. Footsteps approached. Not outside the room. Inside. Closer, closer. I wrote faster, desperate, knowing these might be the final words anyone ever read. My hand cramped, but the pen wouldn't stop. The footsteps stopped directly behind me. The air stilled. My breath caught in my throat, and then I felt it lean close, its mouth hovering by my ear. "Now you're ready," it said. The sound wasn't a voice anymore. It was the house itself, every wall and floorboard and beam speaking in unison, vibrating with a hunger that had waited too long. I lowered the pen. The paper beneath me blurred, the ink spreading into shapes that weren't letters. I couldn't see what I had written anymore. I couldn't even see my hand. My reflection stared back from the page, smiling, waiting, and the screen of my mind went black. I don't know how long I've been here. Time inside this house doesn't move the way it should. I've tried marking the days, scratching tallies into the walls, but every time I count them, they shift, rearranging themselves into symbols I can't read. Sometimes there are thousands, sometimes none. My journal. It doesn't look like a journal anymore. The pages don't stay still. They flutter like wings, they pulse like flesh, they whisper when I touch them. But I keep writing because I don't know what else to do. If I stop, if I let the silence fill me, I think I'll disappear completely. My handwriting isn't mine. The strokes are jagged, looping, frantic. I look down and see words I don't remember writing. Whole paragraphs appear when I turn my head, as though someone else is filling them in while I blink. They speak in a voice I almost recognize, not quite mine, not quite someone else's. Sometimes I can't tell whether I'm writing or being written. The rules echo in my head constantly now. The paper list the homeowners gave me has crumbled into dust, but I still know every line by heart. Don't open the basement door. Don't look out the windows at night. Don't touch the locked room upstairs. I thought they were instructions. I thought they were warnings. Now I see them for what they are: delays, stalling tactics, a thin veil of control stretched over something that was always going to happen. The rules were never about safety. They were about timing, and my time has run out. I can feel the house inside me. When I breathe, it breathes. When I close my eyes, I see its walls flexing and tightening, as though I am inside a vast lung. Sometimes I hear footsteps in my chest, pacing across the floor of my ribs. At night, if this is night, I wake to the sound of doors creaking open somewhere deep in my body. I try to remind myself who I am, but the details won't stick. My name slips first, then my age, then the reason I came here in the first place. All that remains is the act itself. I agreed to watch a stranger's house. That decision, that small and stupid favor, has erased everything else. I dream constantly, though I don't know if I ever wake. In one dream, I am outside, walking down a quiet street. Every house I pass looks the same. Tall, dark windows, curtains drawn tight. But when I glance quickly, I see faces pressed to the glass. Dozens, hundreds, all staring out, all mouthing words I can't hear. In another dream, I sit in the upstairs room again. The chair is empty this time, but when I blink, I'm the one sitting in it. I can feel the wooden arms under my hands, splinters digging into my skin, and I can hear footsteps approaching the back of the chair. I never see who comes. I never want to. The line between dream and waking has dissolved. The house doesn't let me separate them anymore. Sometimes I hear laughter, thin, brittle, echoing through the vents. Other times it's weeping, deep and guttural. Once I swear I heard my own voice calling my name from the basement. I almost went down there, but something stronger than fear kept me back. Some part of me knows, if I open that door, there won't be a basement at all. Just an endless drop, straight into the center of whatever this place truly is. I've started noticing things in the mirrors. My reflection lags behind when I move, staring a beat too long before following. Its smile twitches at the wrong times. Sometimes it doesn't move at all even when I do. It's waiting, watching, patient. The last note I found, the one that warned me not to stay past the 7th night, still sits folded in my pocket. The ink has bled, warped into shapes like veins. I take it out sometimes, hoping the words might have changed, that maybe it will offer me something more, a way out, a clue I missed. But it never does. It just repeats the same warning over and over. It knows you now. I can feel it pressing in as I write this. The air grows heavier, thicker, as though the house itself leans closer to watch. My candle, if this even is a candle, gutters though there is no wind. The shadows twitch across the walls like restless animals. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I don't even know if I'm still writing on paper. For all I know, I'm scratching words into the inside of my skull. But if these words reach you, if you can hear me at all, please, don't agree to favors you don't understand. Don't walk into houses that feel wrong. And if you ever see a locked door where there shouldn't be one, don't open it. Don't even touch the handle, because once the house knows you, it never lets go. My vision is blurring. The words slide across the page as though trying to escape me. I can't hold the pen steady anymore. The walls are pulsing faster, faster, as if the house's heart has moved into my own chest. I hear the creak of a door opening, not behind me, not in front of me. Inside me, something is stepping through. This is my last entry. If you're reading this, then it means the house has already found another. And now, it doesn't need me anymore.